They told you it was just a game, a harmless dare. Stand in a bathroom, lights off, whisper her name into the mirror. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. But here's the truth no one told you. Every terrifying vision people claim to see, the hollow eyes, the blood around the lips, the pale face leaning from the glass, matches exactly the symptoms of a disease that once killed millions. Tuberculosis. Victims of TB wasted away in front of their loved ones. Their cheeks collapsed, their lips bled at night, their skin turned ghostly white. For centuries, families swore the dead were coming back, haunting them. They called them blood drinkers. You call them vampires. And in America, children renamed her Mary. But the monster isn't only in history. Science proves your brain itself can summon her. When you stare into a dimly lit mirror long enough, your neurons stop trusting your eyes. Faces melt, eyes hollow, strangers appear. Neuroscientists call it the Troxler effect. Psychologists call it strange face illusion. You see a ghost because your own mind manufactures one. So ask yourself, when you summon Bloody Mary, is it her you see? Or is it the darkest version of yourself reaching out from the glass? For centuries, the story twisted: queen, witch, murderer, victim. But every version leads back to one truth. What you fear in the mirror isn't her. It's you. And tonight we peel back the legend. We strip away the whispers, the schoolyard dares, the Hollywood movies. What remains is something far more terrifying, because it's real. Welcome to the story of Unmasking Bloody Mary, the woman in the mirror. You've heard the story before. Everyone has. A dark bathroom, a single candle, a girl standing before the mirror, whispering a name that tastes like iron on the tongue. Bloody Mary. They tell you it's just a game, a harmless dare, but behind every legend lies a truth. And behind this one, the truth is uglier than the ghost. Jenny didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. At least, that's what she told herself as she stood in the narrow upstairs bathroom of her friend's house. Her classmates pressed in behind her, giggling and nudging her forward. The room reeked faintly of damp towels and candle wax. Someone had shoved the lone taper into a glass bottle where it burned unsteadily, smearing their reflections across the mirror like melting oil. The door had been locked, the light switched off. Jenny was the bravest, or the stupidest, so they pushed her to the front. Her breath clouded faintly on the glass, and for one suspended heartbeat, she saw only herself, pale, nervous, a little flushed. Then the chant began. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. The air seemed to tighten. The candle flame sputtered. Jenny's reflection, her own face, stared back at her with hollowing cheeks, widening eyes. Shadows carved her jaw sharper than it was. Her lips thinned into a bloodless sneer. Someone screamed. Jenny stumbled back, her heel catching the bath mat. The mirror face still leered, pale and cadaverous. It wasn't her anymore. It was something wearing her skin. What Jenny saw that night was terrifying, but it was not supernatural. Psychologists have known the phenomenon for centuries. In the early 1800s, scientists noticed that if you fix your gaze on a single point, the details around it begin to fade. Your neurons adapt, stop refreshing the unchanging image. This is called the Troxler effect. In 2010, Italian researcher Giovanni Caputo conducted an experiment at the University of Urbino. Volunteers sat in dim light, staring at their own reflections for 10 minutes. 90% reported seeing monstrous distortions, animal faces, strangers, corpses. One participant swore they saw their own dead parent. The brain is both creator and saboteur. When sensory input weakens, the mind fills in the blanks with its darkest material, and what it conjures is rarely kind. But here is where the legend deepens. Jenny didn't just see hollow eyes. She saw blood. crimson at the corners of her reflection's mouth. And that detail has haunted the story of Bloody Mary for generations. Why blood? Why the face of a woman who looks as if she's wasting away? The answer lies not in folklore, but in disease. In the 19th century, tuberculosis, known then as consumption, ravaged Europe and America. Victims withered to pale ghosts while alive. Their cheeks collapsed, their lips bled as they coughed through the night, their eyes sunken, their skin nearly translucent. Families swore their loved ones returned after death, feeding on the living. The first vampire panics in New England were not tales of Dracula. They were the cries of towns burying daughters and wives who looked very much like the woman in the mirror. The distorted face Ginny saw in the glass? Hollow cheeks, bleeding mouth, skin drained of color. It matches almost perfectly the late stages of tuberculosis. And so the myth took root. Children whispered a name. Women feared their reflections. What science calls troxler fading, folklore christened as a ghost, Bloody Mary. Jenny never told her friends exactly what she saw. How could she? They would laugh. They wanted to believe it was just a silly sleepover scare. But later that night, when she brushed her teeth alone, Jenny found herself pausing, foam dripping from her mouth, staring into the bathroom mirror. For the briefest instant, her reflection smiled back, though she hadn't moved a muscle. And Jenny realized something terrible. The face in the mirror didn't need Mary's name to appear. It was always waiting. Jenny could not sleep. The laughter from the sleepover had died down hours ago, replaced by the slow ticking of the kitchen clock downstairs. Yet the bathroom mirror still lingered in her mind like a bad aftertaste. She swore she could feel eyes pressing from the other side of the glass, watching her, waiting. She reached for her phone, scrolling through half-forgotten internet forums. It was here, in the glow of the small blue screen, that she stumbled on something older, darker, than the playground dares of her classmates. Before Bloody Mary was a ghost to frighten children, she had been a bridegroom oracle. In the 19th century, American girls whispered into mirrors by candlelight on Halloween night, not to summon a spirit of vengeance, but to glimpse the face of the man they would marry. The ritual was delicate, almost reverent. A girl would walk backwards up a flight of stairs, holding a candle and a hand mirror. In the glass, tradition promised, the image of her future husband would appear. Sometimes he was smiling, sometimes solemn. But in some versions of the game, a girl did not see a man at all. She saw a skull, a death's head. That, the superstition claimed, meant she would die before marriage. Jenny shivered as she read. Suddenly, her own encounter felt less like a childish prank and more like an inheritance, a ritual passed down, warped into something far more sinister. Why would young women play such a frightening game? Why would death be stitched so tightly into the thread of marriage? History provides the answer. In the 19th century, life was fragile. The leading cause of death for young women in America was not old age, nor war, but tuberculosis and childbirth. Consumption hollowed them into pale corpses before their wedding vows. Childbed fever struck them down within days of giving birth. Marriage was not only a promise of love, it was a gamble with mortality. To look into the mirror on Halloween night was to confront two futures: the husband who might carry you into adulthood, or the skull that promised you would never live long enough to wear the veil. But the human mind is cruel when bound by candlelight and fear. Stare too long into the flickering mirror, and the Troxler effect once again takes hold. Your face softens, fades, reshapes. Shadows sculpt hollows where there are none. It is easy, then, for the watching girl to mistake her own dissolving features for the skull of her death. Folklore scholars suggest this is why the ritual endured. It was never about summoning a spirit, it was about giving form to the silent dread every woman carried, the knowledge that love, marriage, and death walked hand in hand. Jenny put her phone down, her fingers cold. The game had changed. Bloody Mary was no longer just the monster of a bathroom dare. She was the echo of a century's worth of whispers, the voices of women who had stared into the same kind of mirror, candle in hand, and seen not salvation, but warning. And in that moment, Ginny understood something terrifying. Mary was never only a ghost, she was a question. And the mirror always answered. By Monday morning, Ginny thought she had shaken it off. The candlelight, the whispers from her phone, the shadow of the skull that wasn't really there. It all belonged to the weekend. School, she told herself, would be normal. But middle school hallways have a way of magnifying secrets. By lunchtime, she heard the name pass from table to table, echoing like gossip and gospel all at once. Bloody Mary. Someone had dared someone else to play in the girls' bathroom between classes. By seventh period, it wasn't one girl, it was 20, crowded around the cracked mirror, chanting as if the ritual had been rehearsed for centuries. Jenny didn't join. She watched from the doorway, her stomach knotted. But she saw what happened. One girl screamed, then another. Then the whole bathroom erupted in shrieks so sharp they seemed to slice the air. They stampeded out into the hall, faces pale, eyes wide, swearing they had seen a woman's face in the glass. Teachers rushed in, but by then, it was too late. The hysteria had already spread. What Jenny witnessed was not unique. Psychologists call it mass psychogenic illness, a sickness with no physical cause, spreading like wildfire through belief and fear. Cases like this litter school records across America. North Carolina, 1978. Dozens of students fainted after a rumor that a chemical leak was poisoning the building. No leak was ever found. Japan, 1990s. Whole classrooms broke into panic after a whispered ghost story about Hanako-san, the spirit of a girl haunting bathroom stalls. Mexico, 2006. Nearly 600 students in a boarding school experienced fainting, nausea, and visions after one child claimed she saw a nun's ghost. In each case, fear itself was the contagion. Minds primed by suggestion created real symptoms: dizziness, hyperventilation, hallucinations. The body believes what the group insists is true. And so it was with Bloody Mary. The mirror game worked not because Mary was waiting, but because 20 girls believed she might be. Their brains, wired for survival, tipped into alarm. Adrenaline spiked. One scream triggered another until the echo of terror became indistinguishable from the cause. Jenny could still hear the shrieks long after the hallway quieted. They lingered in her chest, in the rhythm of her own breath. She wondered, if so many people believed they saw Mary, if they felt the terror, lived the vision, didn't that make her real in some way? A legend, after all, doesn't need flesh and blood. It only needs a chorus of voices willing to scream. And Ginny knew the chorus was only growing louder. That night, Ginny could not stay away from the mirror. The school bathroom hysteria replayed in her mind on a loop. The chorus of screams, the stampede of shoes against tile, the pale faces swearing they had seen her. Mary. Ginny locked herself in her own bathroom. Only one candle burned, its flame bending in the draft. The house was quiet. The mirror waited. This time, she didn't whisper Mary's name. She simply stared. At first, it was nothing, just her own reflection. Brown hair pulled back, shadows smudged under tired eyes. She almost laughed at how ordinary she looked. But the longer she stared, the less ordinary her reflection became. Her face began to slip. The contours blurred, her eyes hollowed. Her mouth seemed to sag. For a split second, it wasn't Jenny looking back. It was someone older, hollow-cheeked, almost corpse-like. Then it flickered again. The face in the glass stretched into something monstrous, stranger, unrecognizable. Jenny gasped and nearly dropped the candle. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The mirror had betrayed her. What Jenny experienced was not madness, nor a ghost. It was something documented. In 2010, Italian psychologist Giovanni Caputo conducted a chilling experiment at the University of Urbino. He asked volunteers to sit in a dimly lit room, facing a mirror, and stare into their own reflections for 10 minutes. The results were startling. 90% of participants reported seeing their faces distort. 50% saw monstrous creatures staring back. 28% swore they saw a stranger in the mirror. 18% said the figure transformed into a dead relative. Caputo called it the strange face illusion. The science is clear. When the brain stares too long at the same image under low light, neural adaptation kicks in. Your visual neurons, exhausted, begin ignoring familiar details. Your mind starts filling in the blanks with fragments of memory, fear, and imagination. The result? A hallucination drawn from your own subconscious. A face that is yours, yet not yours. Jenny didn't know Caputo's data. She only knew the fear that clung to her skin, the certainty that the mirror had shown her something she wasn't supposed to see. She blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. But even in the blackness, she swore she still felt eyes watching her. Not from behind, from within the glass. The library smelled of dust and paper. Jenny's hands trembled as she flipped through a thick history volume she had smuggled into the corner table. Its title glared in gold letters, The Reign of Mary Tudor. Her classmates had whispered the name as if it belonged to a ghost, but here it was in ink, centuries old, not a phantom, a queen. Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII, crowned Queen of England in 1553. A devout Catholic in a land torn by religious war, history remembered her by another name, Bloody Mary. Jenny's lips moved silently as she read. In October 1555, the fires began. One by one, Protestant reformers were dragged into public squares, Oxford, London, Canterbury, chained to wooden stakes. The air filled with hymns drowned out by screams. Mary ordered them burned alive. 300 souls reduced to ash. Witnesses wrote of the stench of flesh clinging to the wind for days, of crowds forced to watch as flames blackened skin and split bone. Mothers fainted. Children wailed. Mary, seated in her carriage, did not flinch. She believed the fires were holy, that by purging heretics she was saving England's soul. Jenny shuddered. The words on the page seemed to glow with heat. For the first time, she understood why people centuries later whispered Mary's name into the mirror. The queen had become a ghost not through magic, but through memory. When enough blood is spilled, history itself begins to haunt. But was Mary the monster, or the victim of her own time? Scholars note that England was already steeped in violence before her reign. Her father, Henry VIII, had executed more than 70,000 people. Her successor, Elizabeth I, would order her own share of killings. Yet only Mary carried the stain of bloody. Why? Some historians argue it was propaganda, written by Protestant rivals who needed a demon to rally against. Others suggest it was the sheer spectacle, fire and smoke, public deaths that carved themselves into the people's collective psyche. Psychologists call it cultural trauma, when a society endures horrors so vivid they become myth. For England, Mary was no longer just a queen. She was a phantom carved in fire. Jenny closed the book. The candlelight in her memory flickered again. The distorted face in her mirror had terrified her, but at least it was her own. Now she realized something far worse. Sometimes the monsters in the mirror were real people, flesh and blood, crown and throne. And their ghosts lingered long after the flames went out. The night was heavy with thunder when Jenny turned the next page. The book shifted from England to Eastern Europe. Its ink bled into stories older, darker, dripping with superstition. Hungary, early 1600s. A castle perched in the Carpathian Mountains, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the abyss. The name whispered through the ages, Elizabeth Báthory. They called her the Blood Countess. According to legend, she lured young peasant girls into her fortress with promises of work. They never returned. Servants swore the halls echoed with screams behind locked doors. Some tales claim she bathed in their blood, believing it would preserve her beauty. The red liquid pooled in silver basins, steam rising as if the castle itself drank with her. Jenny felt her skin crawl. It was no longer just a ghost in the mirror. This Mary, though not by name, was flesh, cruelty, and ritual. But was it true? History complicates the horror. Records show Báthory was accused of torturing and killing over 600 girls. Yet scholars caution, much of this came from confessions extracted under torture or from rivals hungry for her land and power. The Habsburg monarchy owed the Countess a fortune. By painting her as a monster, they could seize her estates without paying a single coin. And so, trial records blurred into folklore. Some historians even argue the bloodbath never happened, that Elizabeth was a victim of politics, not a predator. Yet the legend refused to die. Why? Because the story touched something primal, the fear of women who defy their roles. Elizabeth was educated, wealthy, powerful, a woman who commanded men in an era where few dared. In folklore, such women were rarely remembered as saints. They were witches, vampires, monsters. Psychologists call this the dark feminine archetype, the projection of society's anxieties about female power onto figures of terror. Elizabeth Báthory became the prototype of the vampiric woman. Long before Dracula, long before Hollywood, there was the Blood Countess. Jenny closed her eyes. She could almost hear the castle gates creak, smell the metallic tang of blood on cold stone. Whether Elizabeth bathed in crimson or not no longer mattered. The legend itself had teeth. It had bitten into culture so deeply that even centuries later, her shadow lingered in every whisper of Bloody Mary. The queen had burned her victims. The countess had bled hers. Different lands, different centuries. But the mirror collected them all. The ink seemed darker on the next page. Jenny leaned closer, her breath fogging the surface of the old glass that lay beside the book. The heading chilled her. The witch named Worth. This Mary did not wear a crown. She did not sit on velvet thrones or bleed peasants in castles. She walked the soil of America, ordinary fields, ordinary villages, yet her name was etched into nightmares. The stories vary. Some say Mary Worth was a cruel woman who lived on the edge of town during the 19th century, accused of capturing runaway slaves and selling them back for profit. Others whisper she was a witch, burned alive during the fever of Puritan witch hunts. In every telling, she was an outcast, a woman feared, hated, cursed. Children claim that after her death, her ghost remained. She lurked in mirrors, her burned face pressed against the glass, waiting to claw her way back into the living world. Say her name, they warned, and she would come. Jenny shivered. Unlike queens or countesses, this Mary felt closer. Not royalty, not a noble, just a neighbor. A woman who could have lived down the road, hidden behind shutters, watching. But here, too, history tangles with folklore. Scholars point out that no solid record of a Mary Worth exists in witch trial documents. Her story may have been stitched together from the collective memory of colonial America, where fear of witches was as common as fear of wolves. Communities under stress, disease, starvation, slavery, needed scapegoats. Women who lived alone, who refused the strict roles of wife or mother, became easy targets. One accusation could spiral into a frenzy. The flames did the rest. Psychologists call this scapegoating hysteria, when societies, choking on their own guilt or fear, project it onto a single figure. Mary Worth may have been one such victim, her identity erased, replaced by a monster shaped from the villagers' nightmares. Jenny stared into the mirror across the room. What if Mary Worth was never real, yet was more real than anyone? A name born not from flesh, but from collective guilt and violence. That would explain why she appears in so many forms, sometimes a witch, sometimes a murderer, sometimes just a shadow, a mask of society's sins. The page ended with a single line, written in the same ink that now seemed redder than black. To summon her is to summon memory itself, every injustice, every fire, every scream that a community tried to bury. Jenny swallowed hard. The book had taken her from thrones to castles, and now to the simple wooden houses of early America. Yet each Mary was tied by the same thread: blood, fear, and the reflection that never looked away. The next page flickered under candlelight. Jenny traced the heading with her fingertip: a mirror of many names. Her pulse quickened. She realized now that Bloody Mary was not just a story of queens, countesses, or witches. She was legion. She had other names, in other lands, in other tongues, yet always the same pale face pressed against the dark. In America, some called her Hell Mary, her reflection warped by fire and brimstone. Others whispered of Mary Johnson or Mary Wales, each variation slipping through the cracks of oral tradition. Names shifted like shadows, but the ritual stayed the same: a mirror, a whisper, and the unbearable silence before something answers. But cross the ocean, and the pattern repeats. In Japan, schoolchildren tell of Hanako-san, the spirit of a girl who haunts bathroom stalls. To summon her, you must knock 3 times and ask, "Hanako-san, are you there?" If she replies, you will see the hem of her red skirt beneath the stall door, and to look closer is to invite death. In Mexico, mothers warn their children about La Llorona, the weeping woman. Once a mother who drowned her children, she now wanders riversides at night, crying for her lost souls. Her reflection is said to appear in water, black hair clinging to her wet face, eyes hollow from grief. Different names, different rituals, yet the same terror. A woman who crosses the boundary between the living and the dead, summoned by voice, revealed by reflection. Scholars of folklore call this a cross-cultural archetype. Jungian psychologists call it a collective shadow, a universal shape of fear that manifests wherever humans gather around firelight to tell stories. The bathroom mirror, the school corridor, the riverbank, each becomes a stage for the same dark actress to step through. Why always a woman? Why always tied to blood, grief, or betrayal? Anthropologists argue it reflects society's unease with female power. When a woman breaks role, queen who kills, countess who bleeds virgins, mother who drowns, girl who refuses silence, her story is punished, retold as horror. Her name becomes a curse whispered in the dark. Jenny shuddered. The book no longer felt American or European. It was global, pulling her into a web that stretched from London's fires to Tokyo's bathrooms, from Hungarian castles to Mexican riversides. Every culture had its Mary. Every child had whispered her name in fear. The ink on the page seemed to ripple as though alive, and at the bottom, one sentence glowed faintly, like a reflection trapped under glass. The face in the mirror is never just hers. It is the face humanity fears most. the woman who refuses to stay silent. Jenny closed the book with trembling hands. She felt the mirror behind her, waiting. Jenny lingered over the next page. The ink was darker here, almost red, as if someone had pressed their pen into the paper until it bled. The title read, The Bloody Lineage. Her breath caught. History is littered with Marys, each shadowed by blood. Mary Y of England, remembered not as a queen but as Bloody Mary, burning hundreds at the stake in a storm of fire and screams. Mary, Queen of Scots, her life carved apart by betrayal, execution, and the blade of an executioner who needed 3 strokes to sever her head. Mary Worth, said to be a witch or a murderer, whose ghost still prowls and whispers across America. Even in myth, the name drips with horror. From Mary Wales, a phantom bride on back roads, to schoolyard invocations of the bathroom spirit, the name repeats like a curse. Coincidence? Or inheritance? Linguists note that Mary is one of the most common female names in Western history, derived from the Hebrew Miriam, a name meaning bitterness or rebellion. In Catholic tradition, Mary is sacred, the mother of Christ, a vessel of purity. Yet the same name, twisted by centuries of fear and violence, birthed its opposite, the woman of blood. This duality, holy and damned, virgin and witch, mother and murderer, created fertile ground for myth. A name carried across tongues and centuries became a mirror, reflecting society's darkest anxieties about womanhood. Psychologists explain it as archetype. Carl Jung wrote that humanity's collective unconscious projects recurring figures, the mother, the child, the shadow. Mary became a vessel for the dark feminine, the side of womanhood repressed and feared. Blood at birth, blood at death, blood in betrayal, the very substance of life became the mark of horror. Anthropologists point to cultural trauma, plagues that turn lips red with blood, wars that orphaned children, witch hunts that painted women as dangerous. Each generation needed a name to hold their nightmares. The name was Mary. Jenny felt her skin crawl. She realized it wasn't a single ghost that haunted history. It was a lineage, a chain of names linked by centuries of fear. Mary was not one woman. The page ended with a single line, written in crimson script. Call her once, and you summon a ghost. Call her through centuries, and you summon an archetype. Jenny's reflection trembled in the glass beside her. For the first time, she saw not one face, but 1,000, all pale, all bleeding, all whispering the same cursed name. The library was quiet, but Jenny could hear the faint hum of electricity in the walls, as if something behind the books was alive. She turned the page, and the words seemed to shimmer on the paper. Mirrors as portals. For as long as humans have polished metal or blown glass, they have believed mirrors were dangerous. In ancient Rome, breaking a mirror meant 7 years of bad luck, not because of superstition, but because they thought the soul itself fractured with the glass. In Chinese folklore, mirrors were hung above doors to ward off evil spirits, not merely reflecting, but trapping them. A mirror was never just glass, it was a threshold. Modern psychology has tried to strip away the superstition, but in doing so, it stumbled upon truths no less terrifying. Consider this. In clinical settings, patients with dissociative disorders are sometimes asked to confront themselves in a mirror. Many cannot. Their own face becomes alien, threatening, a stranger. This is known as the mirror self-misidentification syndrome. In severe cases, the patient swears the person in the glass is not them at all, but an intruder watching from another world. In one documented case from the 1990s, a man with right brain damage screamed at his own reflection, convinced it was a doppelganger mocking him. He covered every mirror in his home, terrified the other him would crawl out. Neuroscience tells us the brain relies on stable prediction. When the brain encounters a face, especially your own, it expects absolute familiarity. But dim lighting, fatigue, or mental illness can break that circuit. The mind suddenly treats the reflection not as self, but as other. That is why mirrors terrify, because in a single flicker, they can transform from a window of reassurance to a portal of invasion. And it is not only the ill who feel it. Giovanni Caputo's experiments in Italy asked healthy volunteers to stare at themselves in dim light. Within a minute, faces warped, eyes hollowed. Some saw monsters, others swore the reflection moved independently. A few saw dead relatives. When asked how they felt, participants admitted the same chilling response. It felt like something was trying to come through. Science called it the strange face illusion. Folklore, centuries older, called it Bloody Mary. Jenny shivered. She thought of the mirror in her own bathroom at home, the one she used every morning without fear. How quickly could it turn on her? How thin was the line between reflection and visitor? The page's final words felt less like information and more like a warning. The mirror does not just reflect you, it reflects what you fear you might become. Jenny slammed the book shut. For the first time, she avoided her own reflection in the library window. Jenny read on. The chapter heading glared at her like a wound: blood and disease. For centuries, the sight of blood meant something supernatural. In the candlelight of old villages, when a daughter coughed up red in the night, families swore the dead were feeding on her. They whispered of vampires, curses, and witches. But the true horror had no fangs. It had a name written in medical Latin: tuberculosis. In the 18th and 19th centuries, TB swept through Europe and America like a phantom. Victims wasted away, their skin drained of color, their eyes sunk deep in their sockets. At night they coughed violently, lips stained crimson. Entire families were wiped out, one by one, until the survivors became convinced the dead were rising from their graves to consume the living. In Rhode Island, 1892, the Brown family tragedy unfolded. Mary Eliza Brown died of tuberculosis. Then her daughter, then her son. When young Mercy Brown fell ill, the townspeople panicked. They exhumed Mary Eliza's corpse. They found her body pale, blood still pooled in her heart. The villagers believed she was a vampire feeding on Mercy. They cut out her heart, burned it to ash, and forced Mercy to drink the mixture as a cure. She died weeks later. What medicine now explains as Mycobacterium tuberculosis, villagers once explained as the undead. The coughing of blood was the vampire's bite. The ghostly pallor was the mark of the cursed. But TB was not the only disease behind the myth. Another rare disorder, porphyria, warped sufferers into walking nightmares. Their skin blistered and burned in sunlight. Their gums receded, making teeth appear unnaturally long, fang-like. The urine of patients turned dark red as if they bled from within. In medieval times, such a person was not a patient. They were a monster. Even rabies played its part, a disease that drove its victims mad, foaming at the mouth, terrified of water, and sometimes biting those around them. In the old world, rabies meant possession. The lesson was brutal. Nature itself created the monsters we feared. The villagers of Mercy Brown were not fools. They were desperate, trying to fight a killer they could not see. Science had not yet given them bacteria, virology, or immunity. What they had were metaphors: vampires, witches, and Bloody Mary. Jenny felt her stomach twist as she read the case reports. The fear was not theatrical, it was medical. Bloody lips, sunken cheeks, blood-soaked pillows. And yet, the book whispered, When you see Mary's bloody mouth in the mirror, do you see a ghost? Or a memory of the diseases that almost erased us? Jenny closed her eyes, but the image lingered. A pale figure, coughing crimson into her hands, stepping slowly from the glass. Jenny's eyes lingered on the mirror in her room, the one she used to practice her daring for school dares. Candlelight replaced by the cold white glare of her desk lamp, she felt a chill slide down her spine. Because what she was about to read wasn't history or disease, it was her own mind betraying her. For centuries, humans have looked into mirrors and seen what wasn't there. Ghosts, spirits, Bloody Mary herself. Modern neuroscience gives us the explanation. Your brain is a relentless storyteller. It fills gaps, reshapes shadows, and sometimes it manufactures monsters. The phenomenon begins with the Troxler effect. When your gaze fixes on a single point, surrounding features begin to fade and distort. Faces seem to melt, eyes sink, mouths shift. It's the same mechanism Jenny experienced during her dare, but scientists have studied it in controlled conditions. Giovanni Caputo, an Italian psychologist, conducted experiments at the University of Urbino. Volunteers stared into mirrors under dim light for 10 minutes. The results were terrifying. Over 90% reported seeing their own features warp, three-quarters saw monsters, half perceived a completely unknown face staring back. This is called the strange face illusion. Consider schizophrenia. Patients often report seeing figures in mirrors, sometimes threatening, sometimes silent. The hallucination is real to the brain because perception is not a passive process. It is active reconstruction. The neurons combine memory, emotion, and expectation into a coherent but false image. Jenny read of pareidolia, how the brain interprets random patterns as familiar shapes. A shadow becomes a hand, a smear becomes blood, a crack in the plaster becomes an eye staring. In a dim bathroom, fear primes the brain. Every flicker of candlelight, every hesitation in breathing becomes material for hallucination. She shivered. This was why children screaming Mary could ignite collective panic. The brain doesn't just see ghosts, it believes in them. Fear feeds perception, and perception confirms fear. Even dissociation plays a role. Prolonged staring can trigger a mild breakdown in self-recognition. The face in the mirror seems someone else's. Lips bleed, eyes hollow, hair twists unnaturally. It is, as Caputo described, the darker self emerging from the glass. And the twist? Jenny realized it wasn't Mary she, or anyone, ever truly saw. It was the darkest version of themselves. Fear, imagination, and the brain's own tricks combined into a haunting tangible enough to make a teenager bolt from a bathroom screaming. The lesson was simple and terrifying. The human brain is capable of haunting itself. No witch, no vampire, no ghostly Mary is required. All it takes is a mirror, a moment of fear, and the mind's own machinery. Jenny closed the book slowly, hands trembling. She felt the reflection of herself in the window behind the lamp, distorted by the faint glow. She knew now that the real terror wasn't in the mirror. It was inside her own head. Jenny's mind raced as she closed the book on her desk. One mirror, one candle, one night of whispered dares. But the story of Bloody Mary was never just about one person. Across the world, in schools, bedrooms, and slumber parties, the legend had taken on a life of its own, and what had once been a solitary trick of the mind became a collective curse. In the United States, reports of children screaming in bathrooms, fainting from fright, or even claiming to see the spectral Mary were surprisingly common. Anthropologists and psychologists call this mass psychogenic illness, a phenomenon in which fear spreads like wildfire through a group, with no physical cause, only shared suggestion and expectation. Imagine a classroom on Halloween. One girl whispers, "I saw her." A friend's heart races. Another squeals. Soon, every student's imagination is running wild, feeding off the others. Panic spirals. Mirrors transform into portals. Shadows lengthen. Screams echo, and for a moment, everyone is trapped in the same hallucination. This isn't superstition. It's documented science. In 2011, a case study in the U.S. recorded a slumber party where 10 children simultaneously claimed to witness a woman in red in a mirror. Teachers, parents, and psychologists observed racing heart rates, pallor, and temporary fainting. No external agent existed. The ghost was the shared projection of fear, amplified by the mind's susceptibility to suggestion. And it isn't just America. In Japan, Hanako-san haunts school bathrooms. In Mexico, La Llorona emerges at night. Different names, different details, same mechanism, collective hysteria, amplified by cultural memory. The mirror, the darkness, the ritual, these are the catalysts. The twist? Jenny realized that the screams, the pale faces, the collective terror weren't caused by Mary. They were caused by the contagion of fear itself. Once one mind sees a ghost, the pattern spreads, infecting others until the legend becomes real enough to touch, scream at, and haunt a group simultaneously. History corroborates this. Reports of spectral sightings in colonial America often involve groups of children or servants. In the 19th century, hospitals recorded dozens of hallucinations during outbreaks of diseases like tuberculosis or cholera. Shadows on walls, coughing fits, fevered delirium, all interpreted as spirits or curses. Fear amplified perception, and perception confirmed fear. Jenny shivered, thinking of her own encounter. Her singular experience in front of a bathroom mirror was nothing compared to the thousands of synchronized hallucinations across decades, across continents. The curse of Bloody Mary was less a supernatural force and more a human one, a contagion of imagination. The message was haunting and simple. The horror of Bloody Mary does not reside in some ghostly figure waiting in mirrors. It resides in us, in our shared capacity to frighten one another, in our brains wired to detect threat and pattern, and in the stories we pass from generation to generation. Jenny turned off her lamp, but the echo of collective screams lingered in her mind. The mirror in her room reflected only herself, but she now understood that she had stared into something far larger, the mirror of shared human fear. Jenny lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The echoes of collective screams of mirrors and shadows still haunted her. But the truth about Bloody Mary was not just about ghosts. It was about stories themselves. For centuries, humans have been drawn to fear. Fairy tales, cautionary tales, and legends of spirits were never just entertainment. They were a way to teach, warn, and prepare. The ritual of calling Bloody Mary is more than a dare. It's a rehearsal for confronting the unknown. Children whisper her name in dark bathrooms because it allows them to practice facing fear safely, to test courage, and to navigate the fragile boundary between imagination and reality. Anthropologists call this the play of ritualized fear. A seemingly harmless game in a bedroom becomes a laboratory for human psychology. Across cultures, every frightening tale serves this purpose. Hanako-san in Japan, La Llorona in Mexico, or the Banshees of Ireland. Children learn to measure their own reactions, gauge risk, and distinguish between story and reality. Jenny recalled her own experience, the candle's flicker, the hollow eyes in the mirror. Her fear was real, visceral, but it was also a mirror of the human mind, a tool for growth. Neuroscience supports this. Adrenaline spikes, heart rate increases, and cortisol surges. Fear trains the brain to respond to danger, even when the danger is imaginary. Stories of terror act as a psychological gymnasium, strengthening mental resilience. Yet there is a darker layer. These tales also carry collective memory. Legends like Bloody Mary persist because they encode cultural anxieties, death, disease, violence, the fragility of life. Ginny realized that every whisper, every scream, was part of a chain stretching back centuries, stories passed from parent to child, from town to town, carrying both caution and fascination. The twist lies in recognition. We fear not just Mary in the mirror, but what she represents: uncertainty, mortality, the unseen patterns in the world. By daring to call her, children confront those abstract fears, giving them shape and substance. The mirror becomes a stage, the candle a spotlight, and the legend a script written by generations. Jenny understood now. Fear is not the enemy. It is a teacher, a guide through the shadowed corridors of human experience. Bloody Mary is frightening because she is ours, a reflection of the stories we carry, the collective anxieties that define us, and the lessons we have yet to learn. As Jenny drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought lingered. The mirror will always show more than a face. It shows the storyteller and the audience at once, and it is in that space that legends endure, whispering through the darkness. Jenny's eyes fluttered open, shadows from the streetlight stretching across her bedroom. The memory of the mirror lingered, but tonight she felt something deeper stirring, something beyond candles, darkness, and whispered names. It was Mary herself, not as a ghost, but as a symbol of the darker facets of the human psyche. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, called it the dark feminine, an archetype embodying fear, desire, and hidden power within every woman, and indeed, within every human being. Mary, in her many forms, is an avatar of this shadow, alluring, terrifying, forbidden. The stories of her are not just tales of terror, they are mirrors reflecting the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. In Jenny's reflection, she glimpsed more than distorted eyes and hollow lips. She glimpsed herself grappling with fear, guilt, and curiosity. The thrill of the dare, the collective hysteria with friends, the pulse of adrenaline, all of it was a dance with her inner shadow. Psychologists would call it shadow work, confronting the hidden, uncomfortable, or denied aspects of one's personality to integrate them into conscious awareness. Historically, Mary has embodied the anxieties of patriarchy, societal control, and female power. From Mary I of England's blood-soaked reign to Elizabeth Bathory's legend of bathing in innocence stolen from others, these stories encode cultural fears of female autonomy and transgression. When children chant her name, they unconsciously reenact these age-old anxieties, wrestling with authority, morality, and mortality itself. Even the rituals, the whispers in the dark, serve as symbolic exercises in self-confrontation. Neuroscience supports this. Engaging with controlled fear stimulates prefrontal regulation of emotion, strengthening resilience while providing a safe rehearsal space for real-life threats. The mirror becomes a theater, Mary the antagonist, and the participant the hero facing their own mind. The twist is subtle but profound. Mary is not just out there. She lives in every hesitation, every fearful glance, every unspoken thought. When Jenny stared into the candlelit bathroom mirror, she did not summon a ghost. She summoned a fragment of herself, shaped by centuries of stories, fears, and cultural memory. The real horror and the real insight was internal, not external. By the time Jenny closed her eyes, she understood something transformative. Confronting Mary is confronting the dark feminine in all its forms. It is an invitation to face your own shadow, to embrace discomfort, and to recognize that fear, curiosity, and courage are inextricably entwined. Bloody Mary is a reflection, yes, but a reflection of you, of your mind, your instincts, and your story. Jenny stood before the mirror one last time, her hands trembling, candlelight quivering across the cold bathroom tiles. She had chased the legend for weeks, every whispered story, every dare, every shadowy face that appeared in the corners of her school. And now, finally, it all came down to this: the moment of truth. She took a deep breath and whispered, not a name, not a plea, but a question to herself. Who are you? For centuries, children in America had called her Mary. Across Europe, she had been a queen, a countess, a witch. In bedrooms lit by candle flame, teenagers summoned her, hearts pounding, hoping for a thrill. And yet Jenny knew, at the core of every story, there was one thread connecting them all: fear itself. The truth, stripped of legend and superstition, was far more chilling. Mary had never walked out of the glass. She had never lain in wait, thirsting for revenge. She was, in every case, a reflection, the darkest mirror of the human mind. Centuries ago, families witnessing the ravages of tuberculosis saw lips bleed, eyes hollow, and skin pale as death. They interpreted these signs as curses or vampire marks, never understanding the bacteria slowly destroying their loved ones. Modern medicine now explains it clearly: Mycobacterium, tuberculosis, airborne, treatable with antibiotics if caught early, lethal if ignored, and yet misunderstood for generations. Later, Elizabeth Bathory, Mary I, Mary Worth, the historical figures behind the name, were distorted by political agendas, hysteria, and moral panic. Each woman, whether guilty or innocent, became a symbol of horror in the collective imagination. Folklore fused with fact, memory fused with fear. Jenny's own reflection shifted in the dim light, her face bending, eyes sinking, lips thinning. Her neurons, exhausted by the unchanging visual stimulus, betrayed her. The Troxler effect, as neuroscientists call it, warped perception. The strange face illusion, documented by Giovanni Caputo at the University of Urbino, showed that over 9% of participants staring into a dim mirror reported monstrous faces appearing in place of their own. Every scream, every panic, every whispered story of Mary was amplified by these cognitive distortions. Add fear, anticipation, and the charged atmosphere of a group, and you get mass psychogenic reactions, entire classrooms or slumber parties consumed by imagined horror. Mary appeared, but only because the mind conjured her, and that is the final revelation. The real horror of Bloody Mary is not her. It is us. It is the fragile wiring of perception, the ancestral memory of disease and death, the archetypes of guilt, power, and feminine wrath encoded in stories passed from generation to generation. The legend thrives because we fear what we do not understand, because we carry echoes of past trauma in the folds of our psyche. Jenny finally lowered her eyes from the mirror. There was no ghost, no bloodied queen, no vengeful witch. There was only her own reflection, pale and trembling, illuminated by the flickering candle. And yet she felt something profound, a confrontation with her own shadow, a moment of recognition that fear could be acknowledged without surrendering to it. Unmasking Bloody Mary, at last, meant more than revealing a trick of light, a misfired neuron, or a misunderstood illness. It meant confronting the stories we inherit, the fears we internalize, and the darkness within ourselves. The mirror does not lie. It reflects, amplifies, and teaches. And as Jenny blew out the candle, the bathroom plunged into darkness. The legend of Bloody Mary would continue to haunt children, to thrill teenagers, to terrify the curious. But the real lesson, the unmasking, was clear. The monster has always been human. The ghost in the mirror is nothing more than a mirror of the human mind itself.